We weren't supposed to be out that far. That's what I kept going back to. The mountains out there, they don't feel like the rest of the world. Too quiet, too still. Like everything living knows better than to make noise. We were sent in after a patrol went dark. No check-ins, no radio response, just gone. At first, Command thought it was equipment failure, maybe terrain interference. But then hours turned into a full day, and that's when they sent us. Search and recovery. That's what they called it. There were 6 of us. We'd all seen bad things before. Combat, aftermaths, things you don't talk about when you get home. So none of us expected this to feel different. But it did. The deeper we moved into the mountains, the quieter it got. No wind, no birds, not even insects. Just the sound of our boots on rock and gear shifting with every step. One of the guys, Morales, said it first. "Feels wrong out here." Nobody answered him, but we all felt it. We found the first piece of gear after 2 hours in. A pack. Torn apart, not cut, not burned, just ripped apart like it was nothing. Then another, and another, scattered, no pattern. No sign of a firefight, no shell casings, no blood trail leading away. Just pieces. That's when we started seeing the bones. At first, I told myself they were animal. They had to be. This was a rough terrain. Things die out here all the time. But then I saw a boot. Still laced, still attached. I didn't say anything. None of us did. We just kept moving forward. And then we saw the cave. It was massive, set into the side of a mountain like it had always been there. Like the mountain grew around it instead of the other way around. The opening was wide enough to swallow all of us in the darkness inside. It didn't look normal. It looked deep, too deep. There were more bones near the entrance. Some old, some not. Morales whispered, "No way they went in there." But we all knew. They had. We spread out, checking the perimeter, calling out. Nothing came back but our own voices echoing. Wrong. Then it happened. A sound. From inside the cave. Heavy. Slow. A single step that echoed out like it carried weight the ground wasn't meant to hold. We froze. Another step, closer this time. You ever hear something and your body reacts before it catches up? That's what this was like. Every instinct screaming at once. Run. Hide. Don't move. I remember gripping my rifle so tight my hands started to shake. And then it came out. At first, all I saw was movement in the dark. Something shifting where there shouldn't have been space. Then it stepped into the light. It had a duck to clear the cave. That's the part I can't get out of my head. It was tall. Too tall. Not just a big man. This thing, it was massive. 12, maybe 15 feet tall. Broad shoulders, long limbs, covered in thick reddish hair that caught the sunlight just enough to make it look almost burning. Its eyes locked onto us, not confused, not startled. It knew we were there, like it had been waiting. It held something in its hand, a long, crude spear, not sharpened metal, not anything modern. Just a jagged, heavy point fixed to a thick shaft, like it had been made for one purpose. Hunting. No one spoke. No one breathed. And then it moved. Faster than something that size should be able to. One step, no, one lunge, and the ground shook under it. That's when everything broke. Shouting, gunfire, chaos. But even as we opened fire, even as rounds hit, it kept coming. And in that moment, standing at the mouth of that cave, surrounded by what was left of the patrol we were sent to find, I understood something I wish I didn't. We weren't hunting anything. We walked straight into its territory. Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Towels. I'm your host, Cupcake. Today is episode 9 of the Cryptid Files, a series where we explore the creatures that lurk on the edges of folklore and fear. Tonight's story doesn't come from folklore. It comes from war. From a place where fear already lives in the air, where every shadow matters, and every sound could mean something is watching you. But this is something different. Because the story you just heard isn't about an enemy. It isn't about strategy or territory or anything human. It's about a creature so large, so violent, that the people who encountered it were never meant to speak about it at all. Or story that, according to some, was quietly erased. No official reports, no records, just whispers from those who claim they were there. And the deeper you go into it, the harder it becomes to ignore one question. What did they actually find in those mountains? Tonight, we're heading into Afghanistan, into a remote stretch of terrain where an entire patrol vanished, and something else was waiting. This is the story of the Afghan Giant. So what exactly is the Afghan Giant? The story first started circulating during the early 2000s, right in the middle of the war of Afghanistan. It didn't come from ancient folklore, and it didn't come from a local legend. It came from whispers. Stories shared between soldiers, passed quietly, and eventually making their way outside of military circles. Some people call it the Giant of Kandahar. Others don't call it anything at all. They just describe what they saw. A massive figure, standing anywhere from 12 to 15 feet tall, too large to mistake, too unnatural to explain away. Covered in long, reddish hair that stood out against the muted tones of the mountains, making it visible, but somehow still easy to lose track of. Its build, not just big, but powerful. Broad shoulders, long arms, the kind of strength that doesn't just overpower, it destroys. And then there is the detail that makes the story even harder to shake. It wasn't mindless. Witnesses, at least the ones who have spoken, describe something aware, intentional. Because this thing wasn't just attacking, it was using a weapon. A long, crude spear-like object, heavy, jagged, something that looked handmade and built for one purpose: hunting. According to the story, the encounter turned deadly almost instantly. One soldier was killed with a single strike, impaled before anyone could react. And it didn't stop there. It reportedly took multiple troops, multiple rounds, to bring the creature down. Not seconds, not a quick fight. A struggle. The kind that shouldn't happen, because something like this shouldn't exist. And yet, the story didn't disappear. It spread. Quietly, but carefully. Just enough to leave a question behind. If none of this is real, then why does every version sound so similar? The story most people point to, the one that refuses to go away, is what's now known as the Kandahar Incident. It begins the same way a lot of military stories do, with something going wrong. A patrol, experienced, trained, and equipped, was moving through a remote mountainous region of Afghanistan, and then, without warning, they vanished. No distress call, no extraction request, no sign of engagement, just silence. At first, it didn't make sense. Losing communication in that terrain, possible, but losing an entire unit without a trace, that's when it stops being routine. And that's when a special operations team was sent in to find out what happened. Search, recover, report. Simple, on paper. The team moved in the same region, following the same known coordinates of the missing patrol. The deeper they went, the more things started to feel off. Not just the silence, but the absence of anything living. No wildlife, no movement, nothing. Then they started finding pieces, gear, discarded packs, equipment left behind. Not destroyed in combat, not burned or broken, just scattered. Like whatever happened there didn't follow any kind of pattern they understood. Then came the remains. Human, not all of them intact, some old, some not. Enough to confirm one thing. The missing patrol didn't leave. And that's when they found the cave. Set into the side of the mountain, massive and dark, the kind of place that didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. There were signs around the entrance, old equipment, and more bones. And something else. Evidence that something had been living there. Not passing through, living. The team spread out, scanning the area, trying to piece together what could have happened. And then, movement from inside the cave. What happens next is where the story shifts from explainable to something else entirely. It came out fast, faster than something that size should be able to move. A massive figure, towering, broad, covered in reddish hair, emerged from the darkness like it had been waiting. And before anyone could fully react, it charged. One soldier didn't even have time to raise his weapon. The creature drove a spear-like object straight through him, lifting him off the ground in a single motion. Instant, violent, unavoidable. That's when everything broke. Shouting, gunfire, commands overlapping in pure chaos. Rounds hit the creature again and again, but it didn't go down. It kept moving, kept pushing forward, like it didn't register pain the way anything else would. It reportedly took multiple soldiers to sustain fire before it finally collapsed. Not quickly, not cleanly, a fight. And then, just like that, it was over. But the story doesn't end there. Because according to those who claim to know what happened next, the body didn't stay. It was secured, loaded, and airlifted out of the region. No photos released, no official documentation. Nothing that would confirm what they had just encountered. And the soldiers? They were told not to talk. No reports beyond standard language. No details. No mention of what was actually found in that cave. Just another mission, just another explanation, filed away and buried. But if that's true, then whatever they brought out of those mountains was never meant to be seen again. So, could any of this actually be real? Or is it just another story that grew in the dark, shaped by fear, distance, and time? Because when you strip it down, there are explanations that make sense. War zones are unpredictable. Stories get told, retold, and sometimes exaggerated. Details shift, moments get bigger, and before long, something ordinary can turn into something impossible. That's one possibility. Another? Misidentification. In the chaos of a high-stress environment, in unfamiliar terrain, it's not impossible that something human, or at least explainable, was mistaken for something else. In enemy combat, a figure distorted by distance, adrenaline, and fear. It happens. But then there's the psychological side. Extreme stress, sleep deprivation, the constant awareness that something could go wrong at any second. That kind of pressure changes how people see things, how they remember them. It can blur the line between what happened and what it felt like happened. So yes, there are ways to explain the story, ways to bring it back into something rational. But then, you start looking closer. And that's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the description, they don't vary much. Across different tellings, different people, the same details keep showing up. The height, the hair, the strength, even the weapon. And then there's the setting. The cave, the bones. Not just one detail, but a pattern. Something living in isolation. Something territorial. Something that doesn't just pass through, but stays. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. How specific the story feels. It's not vague. It's not dreamlike. It's structured. Like something experienced, not imagined. So you're left with a choice. Either this is a story that somehow formed the same way over and over again, or there's a reason those details never change. And that reason might be because they're true. But what if this isn't just a modern story? What if it didn't start in those mountains? And it didn't start during the war? What if it's something older? Because the idea of giants isn't new. It shows up across cultures, across continents, across time. Stories of massive beings far larger than humans, stronger, faster, often described as something just outside the natural order. And most of the time, those stories get pushed aside, labeled as myth, exaggeration, symbolic. But every now and then, something like this surfaces. A story that doesn't feel ancient, doesn't feel distant. It feels recent. Documented, at least in whispers, And then you start looking at where these stories happen. Not cities, not populated areas, remote places, mountains, dense forests, regions that are difficult to reach, and even harder to fully explore. Places where something could exist without being seen. Afghanistan's terrain is vast, unforgiving, and in many areas still largely untouched. So the question becomes not could something hide there, but how long could it have been there already? Because if something like this does exist, it wouldn't need to be everywhere. It would just need to be one place, one territory, one environment where it could survive undisturbed. And maybe that's what the cave was. Not a random attack, but a boundary. A line that was crossed. So what if this wasn't a one-off? What if something had always lived in places we don't fully control? And every once in a while, someone walks too far in. If you've been listening for a while, you've probably noticed a pattern. These stories, no matter where they come from, they start to feel connected. Not identical, but similar in ways that are hard to ignore. Because not everything stays in one place. We like to think certain things belong to certain regions, that what exists in one part of the world stays there. But that's not always how it works. Some things are territorial. They don't roam endlessly. They choose a place and they keep it. And if something crosses into that space, it doesn't end well. And then there are the ones that feel aware. Not just reacting, not just surviving, hunting, watching, waiting for the right moment to move. That's what makes stories like this different. It's not just about size. It's not just about strength. It's about intelligence, intention. Because when something understands what it's doing, when it knows how to defend its space, when it chooses when to strike, it stops being a mystery and starts becoming something else entirely. Something that doesn't want to be discovered. Something that stays hidden, not by accident, but by design. And some don't want to be found. War changes people. It pushes the mind, the body, everything to its limit. You're trained to expect danger, to recognize it, to respond to it. Enemy movements, weapons, tactics, things that make sense, things you can prepare for. But this is different. Because how do you prepare for something that isn't supposed to exist? Out there, in those mountains, those soldiers weren't just dealing with the unknown. They were facing something that didn't fit into anything they'd been trained for. Something that didn't follow rules, didn't hesitate, and surely didn't miss. And that's where the real fear lives. Not in what you can see, but in what you can't explain. Because it's one thing to fight an enemy you understand. It's another deface something that shouldn't exist at all. If tonight's story gave you chills, or left you wondering what else might be out there, you are not alone. Have you experienced anything unusual in remote areas? Military encounters you can't explain? Or maybe the unsettling feeling that something is watching you? I want to hear from you. Send your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. Remember, all stories will remain anonymous. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.